Kia ora, welcome everyone. I declare the meeting open, and right at the outset I invite everyone to stand to say the opening Karakia.
Taka te hau ki te taka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki Utah, kia mā tara e hi aki ana te atakura, he teo, he huka, he hau, ti hei mauri ora.
So welcome everyone to today's Regulatory Processes Committee meeting, to the Procedural Hatapi Regulatory Processes Committee. And remember that we are the brain, just in case we've forgotten, which looks at processes, works out how to achieve the tasks at hand, and looks to improve efficiency. So that's high aspirations for us to aspire, Please note that the meeting is being live streamed, and please let me or Democracy Services, so Officer Johnson, know if you intend to leave the meeting. He quite likes that, no? And a special welcome to Liz Kelly, new member of the team, appointed to represent Ngāti Toa at this table. Welcome along. We will have morning tea around 10:30, as we're still likely to be going then. Right, apologies. You made it, Jenny. I move that the... We don't have the mayor?
Are there any apologies? Yeah.
Are there any apologies?
The mayor will be coming when he has time in between some other important engagements.
Right, okay. Well, there will be an apology for lateness, so I move that we accept the apology from Mayor Foster. Seconder, please. Councillor Condi, thank you. Please vote accordingly. Thank you, that is carried. I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to any item on the agenda. Okay, I move that the committee approves the meetings of the meeting held on the 8th of June 2021, that's 2 months ago now, having been circulated, and they be taken as read and confirmed as an accurate record of that meeting. So a seconder, preferably someone who's actually read them. Councillor O'Neill. I put the motion, which has been moved and seconded. Please vote. Thank you. There are no items not on the agenda, so we'll go straight to public participation. First off, we have Lydia Pack from Cedar Estate Construction. She is on Zoom. Oh, right.
Hi.
Back was turned to you, Lydia. Over to you. You have 10 minutes. Welcome to speak to us.
Welcome, Morena. May I share screen? Would it be possible to share screen for my presentation?
While we're getting that sorted, I should have mentioned that within your 10 minutes, if you want to allow any time for questions, it needs to be within those 10 minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right, we set.
It's usually under security.
Yeah, I think we're set now.
Thank you so much.
Oh.
Morena, everyone. I'm here today to present the idea from each of the buyers at the subdivision and their suggestion for the name of the subdivision, which is being tabled at council today. Just to give you a little bit of a history, so there's 5 buyers at the estate at the moment. Hopefully there may be more in the future, but all the buyers who have contracts in place for the estate have put their vote down in terms of the name that they would like to be considered today. While they understand the committee has final say in the decision process, we do ask that perhaps you do consider our thoughts and the importance of this name to all of us. So today I'd just like to quickly go through history of the name of Khandallah and how we came to our name, the rationale, the vote of the new owners at the street, the concern we have for the name that has been suggested, and other alternative and Māori names that we would like to propose if our proposed name isn't accepted. We also welcome Māori who are part of this naming committee and any names that they may have suggested that link back to the heritage and culture of the site. We feel that those should be given predominance over any names suggested as part of this presentation and would be very receptive to them. So as part of our research and work on Khandallah and the naming of the street in Khandallah, we went back to not only knowing that Khandallah has many streets named after Indian names, but actually looking at where did actually the name Khandallah come from? What is its meaning? What is its significance? What does it mean to the people of Khandallah? And from that came some of the research that historians have made, which is that perhaps the name Khandallah came from either a homestead built by Captain James Andrew, who returned from duty in India, or Edward Battersby, who worked at the East Indian Company. The interpretation of the name Khandallah as meaning the resting place of God, and that has been something that has been embraced by many Khandallah residents. As can be seen, not only it's mentioned in many, many areas of our history and culture. Wellington Library History of Khandallah mentions the resting place of God. Khandallah Society mentions the resting place of God and what it means to them. Newspapers like Stuff and Dominion Post mention the resting place of God and its significance to Khandallah. The Old Region Wellington Facebook place with all its photos also mentions the significance of the resting place of God. Kashmir School, Khandallah School, both talk about the resting place of God and teach it to their children and the history of our suburb. Even Wellington's band has an opening track called Khandallah and talks about its meaning of the resting place of God. Town planners at the International Planning Conference in New Zealand also talked about Khandallah and its significance as in one of the few places with Indian names, and they talk about the meaning of the resting place of God and how it relates to Khandallah. So it's very, as you can imagine, it's very much intertwined with the history and the feeling and the love of our suburb and our culture. As you can see, it is a beautiful town, beautiful place, and it seems like a very apt name for a place that's much loved by many. So what we felt is, how do we link in this new subdivision to the essence of the name, not just another Indian street name, but how do we link it into really what was originally meant by when people named Khandallah and what the heart of it was. We thought, could we actually tie the meaning of this street name into the meaning of Khandallah, so we can interweave the street name with the actual history and culture of the suburb. So what we did is we started looking into, what does the resting place of God mean in India? What are the building materials that are used in the resting place of God? What things can actually interrelate and link? And especially since we're building 5 new homes and hopefully more in the future, and providing these places of love and joy and care for each of the homeowners, how can we tie this in? And one of the things that we thought of is these often all wooden homes in New Zealand, we often build with wood. What is the word of gods in India? And from our research, we came to the botanical name Cetus deodora, which is also English common name, cedar. It derives from the Sanskrit word devradu, which means wood of the god, and it's a compound of the word god and wooden tree. The etymology of deodar actually suggests that it comes from the first half of the Sanskrit term, which means divine, deity, and deus, and the second class is with druid, tree, and true. Indian Himalayan cedar, often used in places that are seen as the resting place of God. We felt that there was a synergy here. What we could do, more perfect name than the resting place of God to have the wood of God in it. One of the things that we could do is we could tie it in, and we could actually use cedar in each of the different homes, and part of our vision board you can see here, and actually use some Himalayan cedar imported to actually give the place a real sense of significance and connection with its history. Other things we could do is we could actually plant the native cedar. There is a native cedar in New Zealand. While we can't plant Himalayan cedar because we do want to be supporting native flora and fauna, Pōnanga is a beautiful native cedar that actually could be planted in areas of significance in the subdivision as well. So we felt our suggestion of each of the different 5 residents in this way felt that Cedar Way, meaning the wood of the god, linking into Khandallah, the resting place of the god, would be a beautiful name, and one that we felt had significance to all of us. Each of us has put forward a bit of a voting name. So the owners of the first place of the subdivision, Chris and Lisa Herbert, have voted that they would prefer this name if possible. Michael Callahan, the owner of the next part of the subdivision, has also voted. Julia Rothman, the owner of what would be perhaps number 3, has also voted. Bruce Miller, I'll just take you to that next page when it does. Bruce Miller, who will be owning lot 12, and myself, who will be living on lot 9. I intend to live here in the foreseeable future. So 5 out of 5 of us residents have voted for Cedar Way. We do recognise that we are attached to another private way, which is 19A and we know that most of those residents have said that they don't want to change their name. So we recognise and understand that. We have some concerns of the name that has been suggested for the street, and in fact, quite serious concerns. The reason being is it's not an Indian name, it's an Afghanistani name, so it doesn't link to the Indian culture and heritage of the site. And while Kabul has an Afghanistani background, it doesn't link to Khandallah as a whole. Particularly for our children and for those, basically the tone and the culture that we want to promote in the street. We really want to have a street that's accepting, understanding of all cultures, all religions, all diversity. Right now in Banyan, people of LGBTQIA are in fear of harassment, intimidation, persecution, and death. There's discrimination, assault, rape, and arrest. We don't feel that right now, a little bit like when we choose names, we choose support of a particular things that are going on in that area. And names are a real place of significance and importance. And often we don't get to explain the rationale and the reason behind them to people. And so we just are very concerned about the link right now to that. Our vision for this suburb is a family-friendly one, where children are brought up in a place of tolerance and acceptance, a celebration of diversity and identity. And we feel that a sensitive naming of the subdivision would really reflect this. You know, place names are such an important part of our people's sense of well-being, feeling at home. They're a major sense of self-importance, social importance. University professor Melina Weber specialises in Māori identity and ways in which race, ethnicity and culture impact our young people. And you can see here that we sort of feel that leads us almost on to, if you don't feel that Cedar Way is quite the right connection for the street, we would like to suggest other alternative Indian Māori names. One suggestion that has come up is Puri Way.
Sorry, Lydia, can I interrupt you? Look, we've got, if you want to allow time for questions, we've got just over half a minute.
This is the last slide.
Thank you.
One suggestion is Puri Way, an Indian town, but also has a Māori meaning of holding, and we can tie that into the work. Atahua Way, which is beautiful way, and then 2 names associated with cedar and others with safe haven. We ask that the committee considers this if Cedar Way is not the decision today. That is it. Thank you, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you for that, Lydia, we have run out of time, but I'm going to ask one quick question. If we were to delay the naming of this at all, will this have a bearing on, does it make a big difference as far as you're concerned if we were to delay this for a month? And I'm not suggesting we will, but how would you answer that?
Absolutely fine to go out for further consideration and consultation. No problem whatsoever.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll have plenty of time to discuss this later, but in the meantime, we shall go on to welcoming Mike Mallow to the table, Living Streets Aotearoa, speaking about Courtney, or some of the traffic resolutions anyway, and you know the drill. Old hand, Mike, welcome along.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Morena, councillors and committee members. I'm going to bring you a bit down to earth after the last public participation and talk to you about council policy, which is not quite as uplifting. It seems to us that one of the purposes of this committee is to make sure that regulatory interventions are consistent, at least consistent with council policy, if not furthering that policy. And we had some suggestions about the way that traffic resolutions as a whole are done, and some comments on this particular one. As a whole, we note that there's a section called Pedestrian Impacts, and I don't think impact is the right word, in the traffic resolution discussions, which is entirely appropriate given there's the sustainable transport hierarchy. But the other members of the hierarchy aren't mentioned. The cyclists, bus passengers are not covered except incidentally. So we suggest that as a matter of process that those groups automatically be considered when and made it clear that they are being considered. Secondly, we note that pedestrians are there, but that some of the pedestrian impacts are a bit strange. For instance, the Wadestown Road one says that it's positive impacts on pedestrians because people are encouraged to exit their vehicle and park adjacent to the footpath. How is that a positive effect for pedestrians? There's another one which says double parking and queuing for parking will be reduced as parking turnover and availability of parking will be increased. How's that a positive impact for pedestrians? So we think that they should be looking at the way these are structured to actually realistically look at how the effects are. And there's another one, the Brooklyn one, which is changing the traffic light phasing, and lots of people cross the road there, and there are no effects on pedestrians identified. Now, we find that hard to believe. But looking at the resolutions in principle, in detail, we note that several of them have been withdrawn and do not appear on your agenda, but were in the consultation. And of significance to us is that 3 of those were specifically relative to bus operations, so there are now none relative to that particular part of, important part of the transport hierarchy. One was particularly relevant to pedestrians, about parking on the footpath, and that's been withdrawn. So the remaining ones are nearly all solely about vehicle movement. But looking at them, particular ones, one we have most concerns about is the Courtney Place one, where, as I've already said, the pedestrian impact is said to be double parking and queuing for parking will be reduced as parking turnover and availability of parking will be increased. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of Let's Get Wellington Moving and the Courtney Place being part of the Golden Mile, and it has been agreed by all of the parties in Let's Get Willie Moving that private vehicles need to be removed from the Golden Mile, that traffic needs to be reduced on the Golden Mile, that will increase safety and be good for businesses. And this is proposing precisely the opposite. Availability of parking and increasing parking turnover means more vehicles, not fewer. And we find it hard to see how that can be seen to be consistent with your with the sustainable transport hierarchy. And so there are various ones that have been withdrawn. We suggest this one should be withdrawn. There are obviously problems at Courtney Place at peak times, but we fail to see how increasing the amount of traffic there will resolve them. There are other comments we made in our submission about the particular resolutions, but the principal comment is please let them reflect council policies and strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We have plenty of time left for questions. Any questions from councillors? Right, obviously we've fully understood where you're coming from, so thank you for coming and presenting to us.
Thank you.
We now have Alex Gray from the Brooklyn Residents Association. Okay, over to you. You have 10 minutes as an organisation and allow question time within that 10 minutes, if you wish.
Hi, councillors and council committee members. Yes, I am the chair of the Greater Brooklyn Residents Association. Alex is going to do most of the talking, but I did want to take this opportunity to say thank you for a really nice engagement consultation process over this intersection. There seems to have been a new guard in the council roading engineering area, and it was an absolute delight to deal with them. Over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. That was very good. First of all, today, not the AR individual, just thought I'd mention that. I've seen it many times. Too many multi-hats. Generally, I support for Brooklyn Lights. In the Brooklyn traffic lights is that we've had numerous cases of commuters from other suburbs parking all day outside the Penthouse cinema, the Salty Pigeon, basically restricting people who want to go to local businesses or the cinema from actually going to them. And I struggled with this concept until I actually met with Charles Kingford Smith and Tim Kirby at 7:30 a.m. at the Brooklyn Lights, and I was astounded to actually see two cars heading towards Wellington City actually hold up the traffic to do a U-turn to park outside the Penthouse cinema, and it completely blew me away. I thought, well, this is crazy. So the parking changes are basically to accommodate, to reduce all-day parking by commuters. They can go somewhere else, and to increase parking availability for local businesses. And now moving to the traffic light changes, there's been problems for quite a few years because of the lack of the right turn phase going up Todman and also going into Cleveland Street, for those of you who know the intersection. There have been some nasty accidents there. Tim Kirby actually showed me a photograph of somebody who couldn't be bothered waiting at the right turn phase going up Todman. So at the end of the phase, as it was turning red, he jumped about two cars who were patiently waiting to turn right and almost had a head-on with somebody else who was also jumping the orange light coming through Ophira Road. So, I mean, that's just a graphic example of some of the crazy behaviours that some frustrated motorists are actually doing. Answering Mike Mellor's point about the safety of pedestrians not being mentioned, the traffic light changes are quite complex, and the phasing that we've discussed with Tim Kirby will actually make it safer for pedestrians to cross. And, you know, we've had lengthy discussions on the traffic lights there. A long time ago, there was a request from some Brooklyn residents to have a Barnes dance and a single lane going through and multiple phases, and with the amount of traffic going through that intersection, with it being the main route to the southern landfills and also as an alternative route to Island Bay, that just wasn't really on. And so we've put that aside, and we're now very focused on getting this proposed change through. It's taken a lot of time, but as Katie said, the support we've got from the council staff, Lindsay Hill, Soontek Kong and Tim Kirby, has been great. It's taken a long time to get there, and we look forward to it. Happy to answer any questions. Laurie.
Councillor Foon.
Through you, Chair. Kia ora, and thank you both for coming in and for the work you've been doing. And I do, the question I have is I just want to clarify, Alex, what you were saying about the parking that you want is the 8 to 4 p.m. Park 60, is that correct?
It's this one here. So
that will encourage the turnover.
So there are several angle parks, which are now going to become 2 parallel parks, and we're happy with that being P60. But then somewhere along the line, the next 3 angle parks up the road suddenly became
On Todman
Street,
yeah.
outside number 6s to 10. It suddenly became 3 angle parks with P60 Monday to Sunday. And that was never discussed. So
we weren't happy with that.
We weren't consulted on that. So we would prefer no parking time limit
on those 3 parks.
On those 3 parks. But if you were, then it has to be Monday to Friday, 8 till 4.
My understanding in the confirmation. Oh, sorry. Am I allowed to discuss this?
Yeah. So it's been a very late amendment to this. So thank you.
Was that those angle parks will not have any parking restrictions, but we'll check that out before
that's
we
our
put the paper
preference
through.
Yeah, because we want to support. There was just one other small thing too, in that we discussed taking away a car park at the corner of McKinley and O'Hara Road and incorporating it outside the Penthouse cinema so we wouldn't lose a park. But when the results came through, it was going from 4 parks, 5 parks down to 4, which wasn't quite what we were expecting, and it was to do with moving the L bars at the entrance to the Penthouse Cinema car park, and they've taken them back a whole car park length instead of just the requisite 1 metre. And if you don't put lines in there, you can actually have 5 cars in there quite a lot of the time because of the older demographic who drive small cars.
Good point.
Mayor Foster. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both for coming in. So at the moment, we've got time limited parking on some bits of this because the map we've got's got time limited parking on all 4 legs of the.
There's no time limit parking outside the Penthouse Cinema.
You can park there all day.
Right, and that's the problem, isn't it? So where my question goes to was when the Penthouse Cinema went in, there was that concern about them charging, and as soon as they charge, everybody goes and parks on the street rather than including their own customers, go and park on the street. Any observation just about the overall picture of what's going on in terms of parking? Whether that space is well used,
quite often
the off-street space is being well used.
The off-street park is often full. I've seen it full. Depends on the film, obviously.
Yeah. And the time of day.
And the time of day.
Yeah, so it is being well used.
It is being well used.
And you've also got extra parking out the back of the deli where something was demolished in there, and you can park in there. And the pub's taken 20 car parks from there, I think.
Yeah, okay. No, cool, thank you.
Question from Deputy Mayor Free.
Thank you, and gosh, it's nice to hear that you're happy because I know this has been such a long process. Well, you're basically happy.
I couldn't resist the opportunity to be positive.
That's nice. Just the rationale, and I'm sure there is one. I just wanted to hear it. To have the piece, if we change the 3 parallel parks you're talking about, that moment would be restricted up to Sunday, and you were suggesting if restricted at all, only Monday to Friday or unrestricted. Yep. How would that be beneficial for the businesses? Or
it's not so much that it's beneficial. It's not a change that we agreed to and it wasn't
see.
consulted on.
I see.
So that's the main thing for us. And some people have, I went around and door knocked all the residents there, and they had family who was staying, and there was nowhere off street to park because the house was already having somebody parking there. And it's very much on the verge of residential and commercial, and we don't want to upset our residents, and we're representing them. And so it wasn't consulted with us as an association. It just appeared.
So you would sort of prefer a more moderate solution of P60 only Monday
We didn't
to
agree
Friday.
to it, so we don't want any parking.
Okay, you
time
don't want
limit
any
there.
restriction there.
We don't think it's necessary to have a P60 on them because they're predominantly used by residents, we think, although
Yeah.
doing an all-day survey is pretty hard.
Yeah. Generally, we do find businesses appreciate turnover, but yeah, anyway.
Turnover outside the Salty, and they're not open at lunches at the moment. There will be turnover outside the Penthouse. And I must admit, the original plan was the council wanted a clearway. So we were adamantly opposed to that. It was, and so we're happy with P180.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And Catherine Penatito to do with Arlington Street. As an individual, you have 5 minutes, and if you want any question time, allow that within the 5 minutes. Welcome, Catherine.
Oh, sorry, especially with the yellow lines and things like that. But in the response from the council, they said they couldn't agree with retaining the ad hoc angle parking, which has developed over this year, I think, because the street width was just 3 metres short of what was allowed. And I have a request that that sort of be overruled and allow those angle parkings to continue, because this is a cul-de-sac, there's no through traffic, there is still plenty of room for 2 cars to park. I live on the street, I'm not a car owner, but I watch the comings and goings, and there's more traffic created by people coming in to look for a park which is not available than would be if you left your angle parking. The angle parking allows for a lot more spaces in an area which is very popular. So that's my first point. I don't know if you can follow it through or not, but I just wanted to make that point. That the other point is that the residents' parking areas are never full of residents' cars with residents' car coupons. The rest of the street is full with casual parking and coming and going, but there are always spaces. 1 o'clock this morning, I happened to be awake. I went out and looked, and there were 4 cars there. Today, when I came down, there were 6, and only 2 of them had residents' coupons on their front windows. So at some stage, I think it might be good for the council to look at the number of residents' parking spaces that are available, because I don't believe they are needed. The whole street is full on a Saturday and a Sunday. It makes for a lively street, it makes for a lively city. So thank you. Those are my 2 main points, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, for being concise. And the points that you've made, traffic engineers are in the room. They have been listening, and I see Councillor Condi has been studiously making notes. Do you have a question? No. Any questions? We will address those issues later.
Thank you.
When this comes up. Thank you. And Paula Suckling on Kabul Street. Welcome to the table. Can you have 5 minutes if you allow any questions within that time?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to come here and speak. I'm only going to talk to the... Okay, I'm only going to talk to the points that I made in my original feedback to Carleen about the name change to Kabul Street as an owner-occupier there, and we prefer not to have to go through the inconvenience, disruption and cost of a name change to the street. But if it is decided that Kabul Street needs to change, our preference would be that this only applies to the new right-of-way, currently under development, not to the existing street. And that we're strongly in favour of a historically and geographically relevant name, such as other residents have put forward, one of which was Taringa Kuri, which is outlined in his submission as meaningful. And we're averse to Cedar Way, the name Cedar, as proposed by developer Cedar Estate, because we don't believe that that's in keeping with council standards. And as far as Bamiyan goes, we think it's a culturally and historically rich place in the world, and New Zealand has had 10 years of development and events support to the area of Bamiyan. And Kabul is the capital of Afghanistan, so it's already got that connection. So, yeah, those are my points, basically. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. So I have a question, and that is, so you're in the existing right-of-way, and the new right-of-way will be going off that existing right-of-way. So it's not a problem as far as you're concerned. That my understanding is that you're in the existing right-of-way, the numbers, house numbers, go from about 19A to 19N or something. That's not a problem?
L is the, M and N are the new ones being built.
Right.
It goes up to L. For us, we've lived like that, so we're used to it. It doesn't matter to us. And I think that's consistent with all of the current residents. I haven't done a consultation, but yeah, we've all talked about it. Yeah.
Okay, I see fellow resident of the street nodding in agreement down the back. Right, we have 2 minutes left. Councillor Wolfe.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. Just given that the information that we received on Bamiyan from the developer, would you change that view on Bamiyan given?
No. I mean, I've probably, because I've lived in developing countries and countries in strife, I think there's a lot of other aspects to a place than just what you see on the news. I mean, there are people living their lives there, and New Zealand has had a strong support to the Bamiyan region with defence and development. So I think it doesn't put me off, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Paula. All right, and the conclusion of public participation, we have a resident of the Kabul Street right-of-way who didn't, who wanted to take part but didn't get his request in quite in time, so I agreed to accept a statement, and I'll read it out right now, which says, I would like to thank the Council for the opportunity to make a submission on the proposed name change for the Kabul Street right-of-way. My partner Claire James and I would like to emphasise our key points. 1, as existing residents, we prefer that the existing right-of-way retains the name Kabul Street. This name is working for the current residents, and we do not believe a change in name will be of any value. 2, if the council changes the name to accommodate the new right-of-way, we do not believe the costs associated with the change should fall on current street residents, and we ask that any inconvenience be minimised. 3, if a name change proceeds for either the current or new right-of-way, we ask that the council favour a historically relevant and culturally relevant name such as Taringa Kuri. Thank you again for the opportunity to present at this meeting to support our submission. Okay, so that's the end of public participation. We're a bit early for morning tea, so we shall go on to the first item of general business, which is the name for the private right-of-way off Kabul Street in Khandallah. So I invite Officers Carleen Thomas and Michael Brownie to come to the table to introduce the paper and to answer any questions. So welcome officers to the table. Carleen, Michael. So you, will actually introduce the paper, which is a slightly the new way of doing things, and then we shall ask questions of you.
Kia ora. I would like to introduce this paper, which is a report proposing a name for a small private right-of-way off an existing private right-of-way currently known as Kabul Street. Thank you.
That is it. Right. Very concise and precise. Right. I have some questions, but I will allow Councillor Matthews to ask one, then I will ask one, then Liz can ask one. Did you have your hand up? Right. Okay. And we'll take it from there.
We might all have
Councillor
similar
Matthews.
questions. I just wanted to ask, similarly to, as Malcolm asked the submitter, if we were to defer this decision to maybe work a little bit harder to find a Te Reo Māori name with some local significance to our next meeting, say, is that a problem from officers' perspective?
From officers' perspective, it is not an issue. We are mindful that there are going to be consents issued coming up as development proceeds to enable homeowners, property owners to build their houses. I would advise that I attempted to engage with the developer 2 years ago, and this is the first that I have had any Te Reo names proposed from anybody, apart from during the initial consultation, which was the Tauranga Kuri. And as I've mentioned in the report, Te Putama, as it was then, did not have a strong feeling with regards to a Te Reo name at that time. Thank you.
Appreciate you've made the effort there. Thank you.
I will ask one of my two questions, and I warned you I'd be playing devil's advocate, and I intend to do so here, is that why does council feel that it needs to tell the owners of a private right-of-way what their street should be called, bearing in mind that council does not own that street, it is owned by the residents, council does not fund the maintenance of that street, it doesn't pay for street lights in my understanding, doesn't pay for street signage, and yet council feels that it should override the wishes, possibly, in certain circumstances of developer and or would-be residents of that street.
Thank you. With regards to developers naming or any stakeholders having any predominance in terms of their proposals, the policy is quite clear that each name is considered on its merits, regardless of who has proposed it. If we go down the path of preferring any one stakeholder over another, it is conceivable that we will have duplication of names, as is the potential for that has been outlined in the report. We may also have names being proposed, such as have been way back in Wellington's early developmental days, that are not necessarily seen as appropriate to either current or future generations, and the policy protects that to some extent by going through this robust process. Besides that, council does have a legal mandate to assign addresses, and a street name is part of that address.
Okay, thank you. Liz.
Oh, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So part of my question's already been asked and answered, but I just wanted further clarity. So you're saying that if this was to lay on the table for that, the concern that you have is that there'll be consents that are coming forward and that could cause a problem, but wouldn't they still just be called lock numbers?
That is true to some extent. However, for certain facilities to be connected, they do require an address. And we frequently get phone calls from people who have put a second unit perhaps on their site and they need an address assigned. And they have difficulty getting fibre connected for their tenants and so on and so forth. So we are keen to avoid any difficulties being placed in the way of people constructing their homes.
Thank you. I will ask a question now, and that is, yep, Councillor Condi will go next. In regards to Cedar, you have come across with a very strong recommendation that we do not proceed with that name, and one of the main reasons is that it is already given to, it is in use in various other suburbs, in at least 3, if not 4, Cedar or similar across the Wellington region, and part of the policy is that we do not duplicate. So you're very strong on that from that point of view. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. We consult with Greater Wellington Regional Council with regards to names to check for duplicity, similarity, uniqueness. And in this particular instance, the name Cedar is part of the name Cedarwood Street in Woodridge, a Cedar Street in Mangaraki, Cedar Court in Whitby, and Cedar Drive in Paraparaumu. If there is an emergency in Cedar Way and an ambulance is called out and there is confusion as to the road name type when that is conveyed to the person on the other end of that 111 call, it could result in a delay which is could have some quite serious implications. As somebody who has worked on those 111 calls, I know that that is a very real possibility.
Just following up on that, I know this has come up before, but I'll ask the same question again, and that is, does not the mention of the suburb after the name of the street, does that not clarify things sufficiently enough?
As I'm sure everyone will appreciate, in a high-stress situation, people don't necessarily think clearly, and signals, messages are not necessarily sent or received with complete clarity.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Condi.
Thanks. I'm just curious about this, the 19A to 19L. So you're saying that there's a new standard that says above E, we shouldn't be doing that really, we should be naming a right-of-way. Do we have to update to the new standard, particularly places where it's already in place? And do we have any idea like how many of these, like how many non-compliant of these might be around the city? Because I do understand the disruption for the residents of suddenly having to update every single address anywhere you've got is a lot.
Sure. So we have listened to the views of the residents, and that is portrayed in the report. Residents in 19 to 19L Kabul are overwhelmingly in favour of retaining the name Kabul Street for that portion. Yes, you are correct. We do not now assign addresses that go up that far. The addressing standard has changed so that where there are 5 or more properties, we need to name a street or private right-of-way. If we tried to continue with Kabul Street in this instance into the private right-of-way, it would be rejected by Land Information New Zealand. So we are more or less forced into adhering to the standards.
I understand that we have to adhere to the standard for the new properties. What I'm just trying to get at is what are our obligations to comply with the new standard where those addresses are already in place?
So where those addresses are in place and are working, we would not change them unless there wasn't a demonstrated need to. If the new right-of-way was named, if the residents had been in favour of naming their part of the right-of-way as well, then absolutely new whole numbers would have been assigned. And obviously going forward, we are avoiding that in any way. We're trying to anticipate where there may be potential to come up against this sort of issue in the future. And I guess that's why the addressing standard should change.
Deputy Mayor Free.
Just talking about the potential for confusion, it's Bam Yan, but there's a very similar word, Ban Yan. And I'm just wondering if you see a potential for confusion there, because I looked at it and thought there might be.
Yes. Yes, I appreciate your concern in that regard. We feel that this one is sufficiently different. However, I have noted that the name Kasuli, should the committee like to consider that name, would be a strong second contender. It was supported by several of the residents in the private right-of-way from 19 to 19L Kabul Street, and so that would be, I have already confirmed that that name is acceptable to Greater Wellington Regional Council, as was the name Bamiyan, when they checked it for duplicity, uniqueness, similarity.
What is the role of Greater Wellington in this? Sorry, I didn't realise we had to check with them, or you checked with them.
So Greater Wellington hold the names for all of the councils within the Wellington Greater Region, and any name, they reserve names for the council. So it's a way that we can make sure that names aren't duplicated.
Okay. Thank you.
And one last question from me. Having discussed this with some of the residents of the existing right-of-way, the question was asked, or they expressed some concerns or questions, if you like, in regard to their right-of-way will receive more. At the moment, there's traffic, there are trucks going along it in terms of the construction of the new right-of-way. So do they have any comeback in terms of the increased amount of traffic using their private right-of-way to get to the new right-of-way? So there will be increased maintenance and such like, which will inevitably occur.
Anyone who owns a piece of land that's shared by others or has rights over land, their rights will be recorded on their certificate of title or the record of title. It'll be done as part of the easement certificate or the transfer document, and that document should detail what people's rights are. Unfortunately, often all it does is just say who can drive over it. If it's done the way I think it should be done, it should get down to detail about maintenance and even indicating different percentages that people would pay depending on how much they use. But it's that document that dictates what people's rights are. And we'd hope that where there is shared rights, that the people talk amongst themselves and mutually decide how they'll make sure that any extra maintenance that's needed because of development work, who's paying for it and how it's done. But it's a private matter between the parties.
Okay, thank you for that, Michael. Right, that being the end of questions, I will. This is turning out to be not as straightforward as we thought it might have been in the first place. I mean, obviously it intrigues me that we have you've got Kabul Street, you've got a portion of that, a portion off that, which is owned by council, and then off that we've got the existing right-of-way, and then off that we've got the new right-of-way. So I haven't actually visited the area myself, but on the maps it looks rather intriguing. We've heard the residents indicate that of the existing right-of-way, they're comfortable with their portion retaining the name Kabul Street, and what we're here today to determine is the name for the new right-of-way. We're not here to discuss whether the name of the existing right-of-way should be changed, because there doesn't seem to be any concern in that regard. So to get the paper on the table, I will move the recommendations in the officer's report. I do have some reservations about the proposed name, but I will move it to get it on the table. We can debate the issue. Is there a seconder for this motion, please? Deputy Mayor Free, thank you.
I'm not quite sure if this is a point of order, but I'd like to move that this matter lay on the table. Well, we have heard that there could be difficulties for homeowners. I'm mindful that whatever this name is, this is going to be for generations, and I don't believe that a month is too big a ask for this to lay on the table while further investigation is made. And what I'd like to speak to is what, can I do that? Yeah, well, I was going to foreshadow that I wanted to move that this lay on the table, but you quickly moved it and seconded it.
Yep, I'm seconding that.
Just getting Alpha clarification on the way to proceed.
Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Not a problem. This is how we do it. It's a democracy.
May I suggest, if we are just considering the new area, that perhaps a Zoom with all the new residents?
So this is now at the table and no other voices are allowed to be heard, I'm sorry. So what we have a seconder, we are now going to debate the procedural motion.
Yep.
So who would you?
So I'd like to move that the matter lay on the table to come before the next committee meeting.
Right, and we have a seconder for that. Do we have anybody who wants to debate that issue, to comment on it, to say that they're not in favour of doing that?
I want to speak a second. First of all, I want to say how great it is to have Liz here, and this is exactly the reason why we have, so grateful and to have mana whenua reps around the table to help us in this exact kind of process. This committee has already kind of push back about te reo Māori names, and I really appreciate the responsiveness of officers to that. However, I think, that we now that we have mana whenua representation around the table, we can, even more proactively pursue that. And just, I guess, we have a lot of I'm not a fan of these themes, to be honest with you, and particularly the one in Khandallah, because it's kind of it's a bit of a double colonisation whammy in terms of the kind of the Raj names adopted by people who had colonised India and then came here and colonised New Zealand. So I think this is a great opportunity to see if there is a te reo Māori name with some significance to mana whenua, and given that there's not great support for any of the proposed names, that it's well worth taking a little bit of extra time to see if we can come up with something. And, that we also have so few place and street names that it's a really good opportunity to introduce some more te reo Māori.
We have further speakers, but if my memory serves me right, and it doesn't always serve me right, but it wasn't that long ago, I think the developer listed a few possibilities, and it might be useful for that to be emailed through to us to consider as part of, if this does go through, to be looked at over the next few weeks. Back to, I think we've got Councillor Condi and then Liz.
Thank you. Totally comfortable with laying this on the table for the private right-of-way to see if we can come up with a te reo Māori name. I think it's fantastic to see having members of our community coming in and asking for te reo Māori names. That's a huge shift, even in the 18 months that I've been here, to have people coming in and asking for that. So I think that's really to be embraced, and it shows that Wellingtonians are really embracing what we're trying to do with the te reo naming policy. The one thing I would hope, if we were going to lay this on the table, is just to give some assurance to those who are living in the 19A to L that you don't have to come back next month, so that you can go on your way, and be confident that we're not proposing to extend that. So I don't know how we might arrange that in terms of laying it on the table, or whether we can simply give you some assurance that that we're just looking at the new section, we're not planning on changing your addresses. But I think if the committee can give that assurance, that would mean that those people don't have to give up any more of their free time to come back next month.
Yep, I think they understand that anyway, that we're not looking at changing the name of the existing right-of-way, and I'm not sure that they have especially strong feelings necessarily in terms of the name for the new right-of-way, which is what we're gathered here today to discuss. Councillor Free. Deputy Mayor Free.
Thanks. Look, I'm comfortable laying it on the table for a month because regardless of what we eventually end up naming it, I feel there isn't actually a clear way forward at the minute. There do seem to be some issues in my mind around the officer's proposed name, and there isn't a very clear consensus on an alternative at the present point in time. And I think the useful point that you did make, Liz, was that this is for a long time, so it's better to get it right. And a month's delay in that framework is, I think, quite acceptable.
I just have a procedural question, which is if we are all in agreement that we want to bring this back to the next meeting, wouldn't it be more appropriate to adjourn the paper to the next meeting rather than laying it on the table? Which it's not exactly, but it is close to the same thing.
Either would be appropriate. If it's laid on the table, then the chair or the chief executive could bring it back to the next meeting. So I think, given that this is the motion that's been moved, I think it's fine. Yeah.
Liz, and then I shall make a comment.
I just wanted to speak to it being a month, and that so that we have a definite time for us to do this mahi. But I also wanted to raise that Khandallah, Mana Whenua have an interest in the area, and Ngāti Tō does. This Khandallah is where Ngāti Tama settled as well, and so this really is quite significant, and that's really the main reason why I want this to lay on the table. I do think that there does need to be a little bit more work put into this, and for the reasons that I've outlaid, that this is for generations to come, and I know there are some streets in the city that are really quite offensive, but I mean, they have happened, that's there, and that's a different matter, so we don't want to continue doing the same thing.
Right, I can see the general feeling in the meeting. However, I'm going to make a comment, and that is that Te Reo names are first and foremost in our naming policy now, and so they do have priority. There are one of the other considerations are themes, and whether we like those necessarily or not, I think there's a place for them. On this occasion, when I first saw the name, I shrugged my shoulders about it, but I do want to emphasise too that the officers made several approaches, I believe, to our in-house Maori team in regards to the proposed names for this right-of-way, and they didn't seem to be proactive in coming up with anything. They weren't particularly bothered, and they were reasonably comfortable, I understood, with Bamyan, and I'm not going to be pushing for that. I think if we've all done our speaking bit, we'll put it to the vote, and then we can have morning tea. Right, so we shall vote on the actual wording. Yeah, laying the right. Right, that is carried unanimously, and that's a good point to go to morning tea. The time is currently, we're going to have 15 minutes, so we back at 10:48 on the dot. Right, yeah. Okay, welcome back everyone. We shall move on to traffic resolutions. In due course, we'll hand over to the very capable Councillor Condi, but in the meantime, we will invite officers Soon-Tek Kong and Zach to come to the table to introduce the paper and to answer any questions. I have one or two questions, but I will allow do councillors have any questions?
Me today. Yeah, Wendy Ferguson joining me this morning.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to the table, Wendy.
This report is traffic resolutions. We have we put out 15 proposals to the public for their submissions. We have received submissions and decided that we have to relook at 4 of them. And also at the end, we had to withdraw one because impacts on the cycleway project, the Cambridge Terrace. So we are now forwarding 10 for the committee to consider. And our recommendation is to support them. Yeah. Thanks. Sure.
Okay, Councillor O'Neill has a question.
Thank you. I just wanted to start on the Brooklyn Lights proposal. And I note in the report it says we are relocating the bus stop on Orfedo Road. And I wanted to just kind of have this similar conversation we've just had over break about where the bus stop is going to be and how we've taken into account pedestrian prioritisation in the area and accessibility.
The bus stop on Orfedo Road will not be removed, but just relocated further north away from the intersection stop line. The reason for that is currently having the bus stop too close to the stop line actually affects the operation of the signals. In terms of the pedestrian facility, the signals would make it more responsive. So the changes that we are proposing for the signals will make it more responsive. We have even trial a band stance at that signal, but the effects of traffic congestion were so high that it was not recommended, and even the Residents Association understood the impact of making those changes.
And then, thank you. The second question I had was the report lists that this is a site for several crashes. And I just wanted to see if you could go into a little bit more detail about potential car to pedestrian or car cyclist conflicts in that area and how, I guess, putting in these traffic lights will address the safety concerns outlined earlier today and through the consultation.
The crashes that we are observing is more about right turners taking risky maneuvers to turn up to Topman or turn into Clifton by having the signals providing separate right turn phase. That gives the drivers more protection and clear message that this is a safe maneuver to take, because currently it's a filtered arrangement, which means if you see a gap, you turn, but some drivers take more risk than others, which is unsafe. And that's what the crash history shows us.
Are we confident that cyclists are protected or are getting increased protection in pedestrians through this proposal, or is it just cars kind of getting more confident at the intersection?
My discussion with the cycle planning team is they're putting forward a proposal to the committee on the 25th of August to have that cycleway extended to the intersection, and that would provide a cycle facility. And in terms of the pedestrian safety at the intersection, what we do is practice that we hold the left turners, the traffic, when pedestrians are moving. So by having those separate phases, we can sort of increase the protection for pedestrians so that pedestrians can start walking across and the vehicles are held, which you can see around the city.
Cool, thank you.
Question from Deputy Mayor Free.
Thank you, and well done for, the long persistence on this particular intersection. I'm just taking on board some of the feedback from the Residents Association that we heard earlier, and I think they were referring to the change from angle parking to parallel parking up Todman Street, and they had a preference for unrestricted. There's only going to be 2 parks. They had a preference for those to be unrestricted. Do you see, I think that's what they said, 3. It's showing as actually 2 because I think the yellow lines come back further, or is... Okay, but at any rate, the question was really about whether it should be unrestricted in their view versus, I think it's suggested to be P60. Or the other thing that the compromise that they sort of indicated that it would be restricted only the hours 8 to 4, Monday to Friday. Do you have any comments?
Initially, when we did the intersection design, we had to provide a separate left turn lane because that sort of helps the intersection operate proper, because having a separate left turn, you don't have pedestrians walking in conflict with turning vehicles, so we can protect the pedestrians and hold the left turners longer. Having that arrangement, we need to readjust the parking spaces. So those 6 angle parking spaces has been converted to 2. The original design was extended further uphill, which took 3 angle spaces to be time restricted. But upon receiving the feedback from the Residents Association, we decided, look, we just not make the change and only convert the 6 angle spaces to 2 parallel spaces, which is needed for providing that left turn. So,
right.
Yeah.
I guess the question that they might have raised too is the time restriction.
The time restriction for the
They were quite keen for some of that to remain unrestricted,
yes.
or only restricted.
It's unrestricted in the revised proposal, which is in front of the committee for the approval, the amendment.
I see. Okay, yeah. And you're reasonably comfortable with not restricting them.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. I think you can take on board the gratitude expressed by the Greater Brooklyn residents people who, in terms of your consultation with them, so maybe you can pass that on to the rest of your team too, the thanks that were expressed by them.
Thanks.
So credit to you all. My question is, Mike Mellor's concerns about enough thought being given to pedestrians or not enough thought. How would you respond to that? Do you think adequate consideration is given to pedestrians' needs?
In any design that we do for signals, pedestrian safety comes first. So what we have done here is actually improving pedestrian safety with increased protection for their crossing. Currently, if you go out there, left turners will be filtering with pedestrians. So with the separate left turn lane, we can protect the left turners, hold them at a red arrow and let pedestrians walk first. So that's increased protection for pedestrians.
And one other question at this point, was it Catherine Penatito, to do with Arlington Street. I just jotted down residents parking question mark and yellow lines. I'm not sure, without looking through the traffic regs again, whether she actually put in a written submission, but she did. So some of those comments may have already been responded to. So if they have, then I won't pursue that one any further. Over to you, Councillor Condi.
Thank you. Just to stay on Brooklyn for now, one of the other things that came up was this question about the parking outside of the Penthouse, where the Residents Association were hoping that we would keep 5 parallel parks there, but in fact officers are recommending 4. Can you just let us know as a committee why you think that we don't have room for that 5th park there?
what we observed on site was vehicles parking inconsiderately. So we have cars that has been blocked in due to lack of parking spaces in Brooklyn. Now, Ohio Road is quite a narrow piece of road, and having vehicle maneuvering in and out of those spaces creates not only congestion but queuing on those main roads. Now, having those spaces clearly defined helps vehicles to park easier and get out easier, rather than having blocking and also obstructing the driveway for the Penthouse cinema.
Yeah, can you tell us just a bit more about the visibility out of that access way as well? Because those parks are sitting right in front of the driveway into that off-street parking space, aren't they?
So the broken yellow lines that's outside or just adjacent to the driveway is actually helping the visibility for vehicles coming out, because that's the only entrance in and out of that place. So it's a busy driveway for the number of parking spaces that caters for it.
Deputy.
I guess just a little question that's occurred to me. If there was a little bit of extra space left over, would it be suitable for motorbike parking?
That can be considered, but I'm not sure where it is.
Yeah, I did ask that earlier in the week, and the answer was when Zach felt that there wasn't, because we really need that 3 metres of visibility for that driveway, so that there wasn't any extra space.
Okay.
Well, there being no more questions, I will.
Well, I think I've got more questions, just not. I think we were trying to do Brooklyn altogether.
Right. Feel free.
If nobody else has any more questions on Brooklyn, then I can go on to some of the other ones. So actually, let's come back to Arlington. So the comments on Arlington, where Catherine was asking whether we can keep those 2 angle parks because, there's kind of room to manoeuvre around them, but officer advice is that actually we need those broken yellow lines there to allow for. Can you just talk us through that? Just talk us through the response to her comments on why we can't keep those 2 angle parks at the top of the turning circle on Arlington?
The places around Mount Cook, the roads are quite narrow, and it sort of restricts service vehicle and refuge vehicle servicing those residential properties. So those broken yellow lines is like to keep it clear so that the maneuvering can happen without cars obstructing trucks, in particular refuse trucks, because we have seen refuse trucks reversing quite a long distance along that road because they can't turn. So having a proper area to turn helps not only safety but the operational side of running the city.
Thank you. The one on Courtney Place, this is a follow-up traffic resolution from another set that we did around the slip lane, but can you just kind of give us a bit of a reminder about where, basically the history of that traffic resolution and where it's come from in terms of the changes on Courtney Place, since Mike Mellor was asking about it during questions?
Thanks, Councillor. The background to this change is due to another change that we have done, because in Courtney Place we have issues with taxis blocking public transport. Now in the late at night they are using up the bus stop as a taxi rank, and as a result bus drivers are either choosing to stop at the bus stop on the live traffic lane and having passengers get on and off the buses. This is considered unsafe from the operation, or bus service or bus drivers choose not to stop at those bus stops. So the taxi operation or the taxi demand will sort of move to the slip lane, which is at the top of your page, on page 83. As a result of that, the retailers or the businesses along Courtney Place were saying, look, now they're all taxis, we can't run our business because people do come and pick up food or drop off people, and we need some support to actually have vehicles that support their business able to park in front of their businesses. So those P30 is actually a mechanism or measure to sort of consider their needs as well, rather than having taxis sit outside their shops and block up their businesses.
It seemed to me that what she was saying, or what her concern was, is that there is a need for parking, and that taking those two out would cause congestion, in as much as that she was saying that people always coming up the street looking for parks, and that the resident parking is never full. And what she was proposing was that be reduced. Is that a solution? Because I see that there's 10 resident parkings. If that was reduced to, say, 6, given that she said that the most she's ever seen it full was 4, if that was reduced to 6 and 4 of those parks were then moved into public parking, would that be a solution?
Currently, our parking hierarchy is to look after the residents in the area first, and commuters will come at the bottom of the list. So the changes that is around the place with Arlington development coming ahead, and with Hankey Street, people parking over the footpath, we're going to put a lot of yellow lines. So residents will start to have to find another place to park, and those residents' parking spaces will eventually be filled by the development at Arlington area, changes on BYLs and Hankey Street, where people are parking over the footpath, things like that. So, I can see the residents' parking area being used up in the future.
Okay, so another question, why are they not doing that now then? If so you're saying that those residents in those areas are parking on the footpath. If there's empty resident spaces here, and then why are they not using it now? It was just, I thought that it was really that it was great and very civic-minded that Catherine had attended and spoke to this, and she doesn't have a car and doesn't drive, so she doesn't have a vested interest. But her concern was that she knows that the street gets congested with people looking for parks, and her observations were that it was more the public that were looking for parking. So that was the only reason why I was suggesting that. And my question is, why aren't they using them now if those parks are available?
I think my answer to that question would be, we're trying to apply the parking policy, looking after the residents at this point in time, and I mean, again, I don't have a sort of exact answer to say, look, is 2 spaces going to make a difference?
So hasn't that changed though? Isn't the new policy that this council has moved forward though, is that there is no policy about if you're building new builds or anything that goes up, you don't have to have the ratio.
You don't have to provide parking on site if you build a new house now.
So does that not kick in for this?
I don't understand.
Well,
so you're saying that you're abiding by the parking policy by permitting residents to park in this area. Is this new?
We're talking about 2 different policies here. So in the district plan, we no longer have to require people to provide off-street parking. That's one thing. But what Soon's referring to is the parking policy, which is about on-street parking that the city has. And in that policy, we prioritise residents above commuters. So that's what he's referring to. So we were just getting our wires crossed about which parking policy we were talking about.
I was just looking for a solution. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right, I have a question about the Waitohi EV parking. Perhaps we could get Tom to come to the table. Right. Well, two components to my question. For a start, just speaking on behalf of people in the area who use the library car park. I mean, it is more than just a library, it's a community hub, and there are only, I think, about 22 parks available for general use. Now, I know we can't wind back the clock, and what is done, but would it not have been, I'm expressing a community point of view, more reasonable to have not taken up more than 2 of those car parks possibly, and I know the reasons are set out here about it being more economical per car park, but 2 would have been more practical and sensible, surely, out of when you're only looking at about 22 car parks all up. That's my first question. Over to you to respond.
Yeah, I mean, as you rightly said, Councillor, if we could wind back the clock, we may do it slightly differently, but this has been a big learning experience. There's a lot we've learned about how many EV chargers we might put in a different facility depending on how many car parks are available or the use of that facility. And there's also a lot we've learned about whether we dedicate the spaces to EV only or not, because currently we know it's also been a source of community frustration that they're in this middle zone where we have EV chargers there and we've painted the bays, but it's not dedicated to EVs. So it's frustrating not just people with EVs, but people without. So it's been a learning experience for people across council, but this was just the first dipping of our toe in to understand this so that we can do it right going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. And as someone who's actually charged my own EV there myself, can you just clarify, so going forward, are we looking at these parks being available for EV charging only, or for EV owners who wish to use the parking space for the full 120 minutes? Or is there legislation that needs to be changed? I think there's something.
So the traffic bylaw does not allow us to restrict it for EV charging only, that is cars that are plugged in and charging. But what we are going to do is restrict it for EVs only to start. And when the traffic bylaw is revised, if it does include that provision, we would then look at all of our EV charging bays around the city to see whether they need a modification.
Just to clarify, that's not our traffic bylaw, that's an NZTA kind of government rules, yeah. I don't want you to think that's something that Helen missed while she was doing the traffic bylaw. That's an NZTA thing.
So once we've approved this, it will be an offence for non-EV vehicles to park in these spaces, because there has been a lot of confusion, as you.
Yeah, correct, and that confusion stemmed from a trial. We agreed with the precinct that we would trial this, and then if it didn't work out, we would move to dedicating them just to EVs, and everybody's of the opinion that it's too confusing and frustrating for the community, and we wear that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions on any of the traffic resolutions? Councillor O'Neill.
I'm sorry, just in regards to deferring the stopping at all times, and there are a few that you've delayed, including one in Roseneath. Why are we delaying? Isn't it rather, easy for public to understand in this area, or why have we delayed that?
Just a few points on that. For Longcroft Terrace, Newlands, when we went out to public consultation, the residents were giving us feedback to say, look, can we do it in a different way? So we are pulling that out to just have a bit more discussion or dialogue with the residents to see how it works for them. Tain Road, we were not, that one came about because buses were obstructed. We're not sure whether it was just a one-off or is it a long-term ongoing issue. So we're going to check with our regional council colleagues to say, look, if we put yellow lines here, it's going to impact on the residents, but if it's a regular occurrence where cars are blocking buses, then we're going to put this forward again. So it's just like reviewing before we go up, because we had objection from the residents on that one. Yeah. Kelburn Parade, again, there's another discussion to be had with Regional Council and Victoria University, because currently the proposal was to relocate the mobility park in front of the new development. What we found was the mobility park did not meet the standards, so we want to have a review of how potentially we could relocate the mobility park to meet the standards. So we are deferring that until further discussion with the Regional Council.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cambridge Terrace is there's a conflict with our cycleway route on. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Condi, do you wish to move this and lead the debate?
Sure thing. Kia ora koutou. So, as everyone has said, thank you very much to officers and to the Residents Association and everybody in Brooklyn who've been involved in a long period of time to get us to this place. It's so exciting to actually have a traffic resolution in front of us that the community can feel good about and that is really addressing the concerns that they've been raising with us for over a long period of time. So just want to, again, thank officers for the work that you've done, and obviously the community really appreciate it as well, how constructive that you were during that process, and thank the Residents Association for that's obviously been a lot of work for them as well. As you can see on the screen, we do have that slight amendment to that traffic resolution that is reducing those time limitations. So we're not removing them, but we're proposing to reduce them from what was originally 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. 7 days a week to 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. 5 days a week. Which was the kind of compromise position that was offered by the Residents Association. They acknowledged they would prefer them to be unrestricted, but that they saw this as a compromise position. And the idea being here that you know, after 4 p.m. and on the weekends, residents are able to use them a bit more because they're unrestricted. It makes them a bit more flexible. But during those weekdays, we are kind of acknowledging that that turnover can be helpful for those local businesses in the area. So this is us compromising and trying to make these spaces work for both groups. Also wanted to just acknowledge that they were hoping that we could keep those 5 parking spaces outside of the Penthouse, and just to acknowledge that we did look into that. We did talk with the staff about it, and really I'm convinced that there are safety reasons why we can't do that, and that I think that those 4 parallel parks are the safest thing for us to put into that location. I'm going to briefly talk about Courtney Place. We'll have a bit more of a debate about this, but I had a conversation with the chair when we were looking at this, and the Courtney Place, this was a response to this request from businesses that was asked for us to do, but when it went out for consultation, we didn't hear back a lot of positive feedback from the businesses, and we have heard some negative feedback from groups like Living Streets Aotearoa. The other thing to note is that there is a significant revenue loss associated with this, because this proposal would be moving us from metered P120 parking to unmetered P30 parking, which does result in over a year, a little bit less than $100,000 worth of revenue that would be lost from this proposal. Based on the conversations that we had, and we kind of feel like that this actually is probably more than minor, was our view on it, with the revenue implications and the fact that we do have kind of 2 competing groups here. And our view was, I think, that we could adjourn that paper up to the Planning and Environment Committee so that it could go to the Committee of the Whole. So that's our suggestion for us to debate. Yes, I will put it as number 4, I guess, that we adjourn TR 9421 to the next Planning and Environment Committee meeting, which is 2 weeks away. Yeah. We're all like, yeah. Arlington, I acknowledge and really thank Catherine for coming in, but I think the trying to keep those 2 extra angle parks where the garbage trucks can't turn around. We know that's a really difficult issue. So I think, having looked at that, we really do have to make sure there's enough room for larger vehicles to turn at the top of that street. And I think, it must be one of the only places in the city where the residents' parking isn't completely full. To have somebody come in and tell us that the residents' parking's empty is an unusual circumstance. But I think the officer's comments about the fact that we've got the Arlington development coming online, and also with Hankey Street, as we move to the new enforcement rule on not parking on the footpaths. So I think you were asking about why are people not using those parking spaces, and my guess is that they're parking on the footpath outside of their house. And once we start enforcing that you can't park on the footpath, there won't be room for them to park on the street. They'll have to find somewhere else to go. So in a very short period of time, there's likely to be more demand for those than we see at the moment. But it might be something that we could keep an eye on, the usage of those residents parking over the next little while. The other reason we're not super keen to make lots of changes to residents parking at the moment is, of course, we're still trying to get into the place where we've got the new residents parking rules up and running, where we can kind of roll out those things. So, maybe in 6 months' time, we would actually be in a better place to do that as well. Just wanted to talk quickly to Waitohi and those 4 charging parks there. I mean, we would clearly, would love for NZTA to come to the party and let us kind of set up rules that say you have to be using the charger to use the park. If we can get to that stage, we can change those. But we do know that there have been lots of instances of people who are not in electric vehicles parking in these parking spaces, which obviously gets quite frustrating if you were rocking up planning to charge and not being able to access. This is one of the only public charging stations in Johnsonville. So wanted to quickly thank officers for the work on the P10 parking in Tawa outside of Nada Bakery. As a local ward councillor, that's something they've been asking for ages, and it's great. It's just a little thing, but it's so great to see it coming through, and these things really do make a big difference to businesses in our community, as everyone will know when they've had those issues come up in their ward. Oh, it's absolutely good stuff. They got a gold medal for their potato top pie. I tried it. It was excellent. Highly recommend. The Lyell Bay Surf Club, we've got a mobility park going in there. And I just wanted to acknowledge it's really cool that apparently, I don't know the details, but Lyell Bay Surf Club have accessibility facilities now to get people into the ocean. But they don't have a mobility park outside so that people can get into the surf club. So we're fixing that so that they were asking for 2. We've introduced 1, but they've said they will monitor the usage of it, and if needed, we will come back and put a second one in there. So that's wonderful. Just really exciting to see. And I just wanted to acknowledge as well, we had a little comment on Hanson Street. If you'd read, there was one particular piece of feedback from someone who was concerned about how their caregiver was going to access their property based on that change. And staff have reached out to Jenny Rains's team to contact that resident and see what support we might be able to put in around her, because clearly I think when we looked at it, the change we're proposing is absolutely consistent with the parking policy, but it was clear that it was going to have a pretty considerable effect on that one person. So we really wanted, Jenny Rains's team is great at finding ways to help people like that. So we've asked them to reach out and make that happen. So just so that you know that extra support is whatever support we can provide is going to be provided. That's everything I had to say. I would like a seconder, please. Councillor Matthews, as always, thank you.
At this point, is there any debate? Okay. Councillor Thune.
Kia ora, and thank you. Lovely to be at Rex. Thank you for having me, and lovely to have you here too, Liz. Thank you for your mahi. Look, this is just a brief thank you and an acknowledgement of getting a solution for the Brooklyn intersection. I do feel I'm speaking on behalf of Councillor Fitzsimons, who I think it was one of her first projects when she started approximately 5 years ago, and she thought, oh, this will be an easy one. So I think she might be clinking the champagne hopefully tonight to celebrate getting something over the line in that period. But I think just, you know, all fun aside, that that is a really hairy intersection, and it is really important that we've made these changes. As someone who rides a bike around that area, it is quite frightening, and I did have the experience of turning right up Todman Street on Saturday, and that was a frightening moment. So I'm really pleased to know that there'll be that, you know, the light to be able to turn right. But yes, it's a highly used intersection with a lot of school children, and there are shops on every corner, and it would have made a wonderful town square or town, you know, city, a place for people. But meanwhile, yep, we're accommodating a lot of trucks through there, a lot of heavy traffic, a lot of buses, and a lot of cars. So safety is key. So thank you to the team, thank you to the Brooklyn residents, and I'm sure that they were very happy with the way they were worked with and the result. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Deputy Mayor has a very brief comment to make.
Yes, look, actually, it's sort of more in the line of a question. I'd just like to thank the committee for putting their heads, thinking caps on around some of these changes and amendments. But and I think it's, you know, as usual, we're doing our best to kind of meet everybody's needs as best we can. It's always to compromise. But my question was really, under this new structure we've got, should we be referring this to the Planning and Environment Committee, or should it go to Council? And I'm just not quite sure. So if you can address that in your right of reply, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Foon, for joining us. It's great to have you with us, and for the work that you've been doing over the last couple of days. I've seen the emails kind of flying around just to get those last I's dotted and T's crossed to make sure that the Residents Association were really happy. I appreciate the mahi that went into that over a very long period of time for Councillor Fitzsimons, but also in the last few days just to get the last little bits, because as anyone knows who's had one go through the award, those last little bits matter. So thank you for that. In terms of whether it should be going to Planning and Environment, that's my understanding. Planning and Environment have the responsibility for transport planning, and our current working agreement is that traffic resolutions go to Planning and Environment Committee, and once a project has had a traffic resolution, then that's the moment where it gets transferred to Infrastructure Committee for oversight. So that is what the terms of reference say, is that traffic resolutions that are more than minor go to Planning and Environment. Awesome. Kia ora.
Okay, we have the 2 extra amendments at the end. On the basis of what's there in front of you, please vote. Right, thank you. Carried unanimously. Moving on to 2.3 on your agenda, page 117, the proposed road closures. So we invite Officers Maria Tomo and Sean Woodcock to the table to introduce the paper and to answer any questions. Over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Sparrow. So we're very pleased to introduce the proposal for temporary closure to enable the following events to take place. Spring into Tawa on 30th of October, the Thorndon Fair on the 5th of December, Khandallah Village Street Fair on Sunday the 12th of December, a very early Christmas over the weekend of the 26th to the 28th of November, and the Johnsonville Christmas Parade. And then for the postponed event, which was the Gaisley Wellington Marathon, which was originally scheduled to be held, which had to be postponed due to our COVID level changes. Our recommendation is that all of these repeat events be approved, and we're happy for any questions.
I have one quick question, and that is, I see there was an objection to the Johnsonville Christmas Parade. Somebody new had moved into a street, wasn't aware the street is going to be shut off for most of the morning. How has that been dealt with, please?
we could, the event organiser along with us are going to talk to that person again to make sure they're across what is going to happen on that date.
Right, so they have the chance to move their car to a different street or whatever in advance, presumably.
I think a lot of just being aware that it's going to happen, because, you know, if you just knew in, you got these things happening and it's like, I can't get in, you're going to not like it.
Yes, and that is probably one of the biggest Christmas parades in the whole Greater Wellington now.
Yes, it is.
Okay, any other questions for officers? Right, there being none, as we've heard, these are all repeated events. The objections have been dealt with, so I move that we accept officers' recommendations. Seconder, please. Councillor Wolf, thank you. Right. Thank you. Thank you for waiting for your chance to speak to us. All right. Item 2.4, which is the proposed road stopping. We're inviting Sarah Jane Still and John Friends to the table to introduce the paper. There are 3 proposed road stoppings. They might cover the whole lot in one.
I'm happy to introduce all papers as one, if that's it. So we've got 3 road stopping proposals. The first is land adjoining 40 Stanley Street in Berhampore. This is approximately 25.5 square metres. That area is used solely by the applicant as part of their garage and access to their property under encroachment licence. The second paper is, so just scroll down to it, the land adjoining 24 Northland Road, Northland, on the Governor Road frontage. It's approximately 130 square metres. They don't currently use it under an encroachment licence. And the last paper is 9 Dallas Court. So it's 131 approximately square metres of land adjoining 9 Dallas Court, also not currently used under an encroachment licence.
You've finished your introduction, so we can go to questions from Councillor Condi.
Thanks. Just on the Governor Road one, I was just curious about the front yard setback and how that worked with the road stopping, because I wasn't really familiar with front yard setback. Could you just quickly talk us through how that works? Because I see on the picture there's kind of 2 areas that are blocked off as front yard setback, and I'd just like to understand what that means in terms of the future use.
So the front yard setback is a district plan requirement that gets triggered when you reduce the road width. So you'd probably want to talk to the district plan team a bit more about that, and I can potentially do that for you. I've also have like a PDF that I can circulate if anyone would be interested. It sort of has a diagram and it shows you what that means. But ultimately, if there is a setback placed on a property, it means that, and it happens in the outer residential area only, and up to a maximum of 3 metres. So any building work that needs to occur in that setback area needs a resource consent if the property doesn't already need a resource consent to do work. But things like access and car parking, so garages and carports and things, are exempt from that requirement. So if you wanted to extend your house into the setback area, you need a resource consent. But like I said, that condition could already be in place depending on site coverage and other particular aspects.
Right, so they'll own the land, but that for those front 3 metres of the section, if they want to build their house into it, they need a resource consent. There's just more restrictions around how they can use it. Thank you.
Great.
Deputy Mayor Free.
I was just going to ask if you've received, and I'm sorry I didn't get this far in my reading for this committee, but did you receive any feedback about any of these sales?
Yeah, so
can you just summarise that, please?
Yeah, we received nothing for Stanley Street, and then 1 each for Northland Road and Dallas Court. So the Dallas Court one, was an adjoining owner who would lose some of their road frontage to the road stopping. We have resolved that. They are quite satisfied with the response that we provided. They were just more concerned that any potential development of that road stopping area would be too close to their boundary, but there are wastewater and stormwater mains that run right parallel to that boundary, so there would be a setback area already sort of naturally there because you can't build too close to those pipes or on top of them. And then Northland Road was from 8 Governor Road to the property that is affected by the front yard setback. You can see on the aerial that there is the house that is in there sits within that setback area already. So that building is actually a 4-unit building, and so any additional work, so an extra story or having to rebuild the building in case of emergency and things like that, because it's multi-unit in and out of residential area, requires a resource consent regardless of the setback being there. So that has been confirmed with the resource team. So I've passed that on to the owner of that building and they haven't responded to me. And so that's, yeah, and all of these affected parties will be again consulted later on in the process when we get to the formal public notification, and they'll receive another letter and there'll be signs put up and it'll be on our website and in the Dom Post.
Thank you. I have a couple of very quick questions. Look, on page 160.9, it talks about Council's Transport Network team supported the proposal subject to 2.5 metres of legal road land being stopped. Now, is that the actual width or should that be 25.5 square metres area?
That's the actual width, so the distance from the existing front boundary to the proposed new front boundary. Yeah.
So that is correct. Okay, good. And the other one is, can you explain very briefly, for those of us who aren't aware or may have forgotten, talks about isolation strips on more than one occasion. Can you just clarify what that is?
Certainly. So the isolation strips, if you look on the aerials, they're those like little green lines that run along sort of the side boundary extensions. What they do is they are about 10 to 20 centimetres wide, really, and they are remaining in council ownership. So it stops the road stopping applicant from being able to cross over the area and potentially affecting their neighbour with vehicle access or frontage issues there. So it's sort of they're put in place to protect the adjoining owners. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Condi.
Oh, I also had a question about that paragraph 9, and it's also a terminology one, that you were talking about a batter easement is required for the retaining wall. What's a batter easement and how do we figure out, when would it come into play? When will we know if the retaining wall extends beyond the surveyed stopping area?
Yeah, so when the surveyor does the surveying for us, we'll ask for an occupation diagram that shows us exactly where the garage sits in relation to the road stopping. So if sort of the front wall of the garage extends beyond that 2.5 metres, we'll require the batter easement. So the easement is engrossed across the whole stopping area, and essentially what it does is it indemnifies council against risk should something happen to that garage. So the owner is therefore responsible for any works that they do and any impact that it has on our property.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Sarah and John. We will look. These are. We've got 3 here. They're all straightforward. Remember that this is just agreeing to go to the next step of a 5 or 6 part process. So we'll have to get a move and second. Well, I will move. Right, Liz is seconding the first one here, 40 Stanley Street, Berhampore. Is there any debate? Okay, let's vote on this one. Thank you. 24 Northland Road, Northland. I need to say nothing about it. I move. Councillor Matthews seconded. Let's vote. Thank you. And the last one, when I can find it. 9 Dallas Court, Miramar. Seconder, please, Councillor O'Neill. Your turn next, Councillor Free. Deputy Mayor Free. Let's vote. Thank you. Thank you, officers. Thank you for all the work that goes into these behind the scenes. Right, I think we're up to forward program, item 27, page 185. Who are we directing questions to? Right, Officer Johnson. Right, do we have any questions before we move on to debate on the forward program, which we have somewhere? Oh, I have looked at it. Right, I have no questions. Right, okay.
So Council has a full program which is managed by Democracy Services, and Council officers in the LT will send us through papers to add to the agenda, which is then reported to the meetings and as part of this full program paper. No.
There's going to be another, we've moved an item by about a month, so we'd expect to go on to the forward program at some point.
I don't think it needs to be noted in this paper, but yes, we will update the living document, which is the full program, with that after this meeting.
Bear in mind, this is field benefitless until I declare the meeting closed. Unless we're in public excluded, we are being live streamed to a potential audience of 200,000 plus.
Everybody's watching.
Yeah, pull the other one.
It's not the case.
Okay, right. I move this. Seconder, please. Who hasn't had turns? Deputy Mayor Free. You don't wish to say anything, do you?
I don't need to say anything.
No debate? Okay, we'll vote. Thank you. And last item on the agenda, 2.8, action tracking, page 187. Do we have any questions on this? Councillor Condi.
Yeah, I guess obviously because this is the first time that we've seen it, do Mike or anybody have any views about, I guess the in progress designation just doesn't feel that helpful for a lot of these. And I guess my question is how completed does it need to be before we flick it over to complete? So for the traffic resolutions, for example, are we waiting for the broken yellow lines to be painted on the road before we flick them over to complete? How is that going to work?
Yes, we'd be waiting for the actual implementation of the decision. For the purpose of traffic resolutions, I know that the transport team is now actively tracking all of those in a centralised fashion. So in the future, for this one, we've got in progress sort of across all of the traffic resolutions. In the future, that will be per resolution, so to speak. Yeah.
And just a brief comment from me. In the minutes, it talked about the officers monitoring the turnover of parking spaces near Kelvin campus, etc., etc. Anyway, reporting back to committee 6 months after the changes are implemented, I asked whether this is actually diaried, because we read these sorts of things and wonder whether this will actually be part of this action tracking. So when we read that we're going to get a report back in 6 months' time, then that will be monitored. Right, thank you. So I'm moving this, seconded by who hasn't had a turn? Councillor Condi. Is there any debate? Councillor.
Just Just quickly, I think that's great on the traffic resolutions. I have to admit, on the road stoppages, it feels a bit like we might end up with quite a long list where we're just waiting for the event to happen, and it just kind of is hanging around. So I'm not sure how useful it is, but we can just see how it goes over the next little while. But it's great to see it. It's exciting to see the new system coming into place.
Thank you. Let us vote.
Unuhia, ki te uru tapu nui, ki o atia, ki a mama, te nākau, te tinana,
te wairua,
ara takatu, koia rā e rongo, whakaaria ake ki runga, ki o atia, ai rā ko atia.
Thank you, everyone, and to our guest councillor, Councillor Foon. I declare the meeting closed at 11:44.
The timing didn't go quite